So I'm going to do a tier list of European countries according to the quality of their architecture. Now, a few caveats first. I'm not going to be creating the visuals like you usually see on YouTube tier list videos because I don't have the program for that and I'm fucking cheap and lazy. So I'm just going to do it like any other video, but I will put the list in the description for easy reference for those who just want to see it. So yeah, the list will be in the video description. Now, for this tier list, in terms of grading different European countries according to architecture, the criteria that I'm using are basically like how good is the quality of the historic architecture in these countries, and B, how much of it is there. So I'm using the present day as my barometer for measuring the quality of these countries. And as I'm going to say throughout the video, there are some countries that are ranked pretty low, but would have been a lot higher in previous eras. And I will mention that because I don't want to seem like I'm smearing these countries unfairly or implying that they never had great architecture. Definitely not at all. So yeah, that's one caveat. Like, I am ranking these countries according to the quality of the historic architecture in these countries, the quality and quantity today. The other caveat is, frankly, I'm really just focusing on historic architecture. From my perspective, all modernist architecture is fucking ugly. So like, how ugly, like every country has some modernist architecture, and how ugly that is doesn't really factor into it. Like, I would say, for instance, like certain countries, like commie blocks are always ugly, but some countries might have uglier commie blocks than others. But that doesn't really factor into it because ultimately what I'm grading here is the quality of and quantity of the historic architecture. So that being said, okay, what is the ranking? I'm going to start from the top. So S tier. The first country is Italy. It goes without saying. Italy has amazing architecture. It has amazing architecture virtually everywhere. It's one of those countries where it's like if you want to travel there, you could just throw a dart at a map, and wherever it hits will probably have astonishingly beautiful architecture. Great quality, great quantity. The only negative toward Italy is that there are some parts of the country where the architecture can be a bit dilapidated, like mostly in southern Italy, a bit in Venice also, but mostly, and maybe a bit in Genoa, but mostly southern Italy. But even still, you know what? I prefer, in terms of aesthetics, even dilapidated traditional architecture beats pristine modernist architecture any day. Furthermore, not all of Italy's like that. Like, there's a lot of architecture that's in very pristine condition in northern Italy and central Italy, even in some places in southern Italy. It varies. But yeah, like, I mean, overall, Italy's an amazing country for architecture. There's beautiful architecture everywhere, and a lot of it's very, very ornate, very awe-inspiring. Like, off the top of my head, if you wanted me to list the best places in Italy, I'd say Venice, Florence, Rome, Siena, Lucca, the Cinque Terre, the Amalfi Coast, and whatchamacallit, Capri and Procida. Some Italian Riviera towns like Camogli and Portofino, Verona, Bergamo, and those are just Bologna, and those are just places I've been to, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some. Naples is a mixed bag because it has really gorgeous architecture, but it also has some kind of dilapidated areas. So, but it has some areas that are really amazing too. And again, those are the only places I've been to. There's a lot of other great places in Italy too, and I'm probably forgetting some even that I've been to. Oh yeah, Pisa. Pisa's great. Yeah. Milan and Turin are nice, but I wouldn't put them right at the top. And that's just because Italy's so amazing. Like, in any other country, Milan or Turin would be like, you know, one of their like star cities, but it's just because Italy is so astounding, they get overshadowed by other cities. But again, like the Duomo in Milan is spectacular, and the Galleria there. But yeah, Italy, overall in terms of architecture, amazing country. Okay, next is Spain. Spain is kind of great for many of the same reasons as Italy, like astounding architecture, a great variety of different architectural styles. Like you have Moorish influences, but you also have parts with some like Celtic influences, and then parts that are more straight up like Mediterranean. So yeah, like Spain, absolutely gorgeous. I'd say some highlights would be Madrid, Barcelona, Segovia, Toledo, Granada, Seville, Cordoba. Yeah, Spain is gorgeous. Like absolutely top tier architecture. The next would be Portugal. And again, I'm not really ranking them in order. Like if they're in the same tier, they're kind of, I'm not ranking it in order within the tier. I would put Italy as number one probably, but I'm not like the ranking within the tier doesn't really matter. But yeah, next is Portugal. Again, really beautiful architecture, a lot of well-preserved architecture. Some of it's kind of dilapidated in Lisbon and Porto, but still beautiful. Very beautiful, like the azulejos, the blue tiles on the outsides of buildings are definitely a great touch. Something very unique to Portugal. And yeah, overall, like a lot of simple buildings. Like it depends where you go. Like some places it's very ornate, but some it's very simple with like whitewashed kind of buildings, but still very beautiful. So yeah, Portugal definitely also S tier. And by the way, throughout this list, when I'm talking about quality and quantity, I'm obviously talking about on a per capita basis. So that's why, for instance, you have big countries and small countries ranked at the same tier. Like I'm ranking it per capita, obviously. So you got to keep that in mind. Yeah, and that said, next would be Malta, an S tier. I haven't been to Malta, but from what I've seen of it on Google Street View, yeah, lots of well-preserved architecture, bit of a Middle Eastern flair, kind of a bit in between the architectural style between like European and Middle Eastern. Definitely beautiful. Next, another on an S tier, another one I have not been to. Is Croatia. Definitely a mix of styles. Like some of it is like Venetian in origin along the Adriatic coast, but then you also have more, I think, German/Austro-Hungarian influence as you go inland, like towards Zagreb. And yeah, a lot of spectacular places. Like if you ever seen Game of Thrones, obviously a lot of it is filmed in Croatia. And for the most part, very well preserved. Like other than the city of Zadar, which is not so well preserved, but every other city there is pretty well preserved. So yeah, Croatia, definitely S tier. All right, so that's it for S tier. Now on to A tier. So the first country, and I do have this country I think is at the top of A tier, but just slightly doesn't make the cut to S tier, is France. Now, France has a lot of absolutely astonishing architecture. Paris is amazing, like in terms of the monumental buildings there, like Notre Dame, the Louvre, the Arc de Triomphe, etc. Versailles, like a lot of amazing buildings in Paris, and the city as a whole is gorgeous and well planned. Also, like a lot of beautiful places, like different types of architecture. Like you have German influences in Alsace, Italian influences in Provence, some Spanish influences near the border with Spain, and even Belgian influences near the border with Belgium. And then you have regions that are uniquely French and have a very distinct style, like in Normandy and Brittany and the Loire Valley, like that whole area, a lot of half-timbered architecture that's really gorgeous. What narrowly stops France from getting S tier is that there's a few regions in northern France, like not all of northern France, but a few specific regions that were devastated a lot in World War II and aren't as well preserved. I think mostly toward the channel, like the coast of the English Channel, and a few parts near Belgium too. But it varies a lot in that region because, again, Lille is right by the border with Belgium, and it's a very well preserved, beautiful, amazingly beautiful city. So it varies in those regions too. But yeah, there's some parts of that region can be hit or miss. So that is really the only reason why France isn't in S tier, but it comes very close. So yeah. Also in A tier, Belgium. Now, Belgium, the level of historic preservation on average is probably above average for Europe, but there are some cities that aren't as well preserved. Again, like World War One and World War Two, some destruction. But there are other cities that are very well preserved, like Bruges and Ghent, and Brussels is pretty well preserved, and some others too. It's just, yeah, it can be hit or miss in that regard. Oh, also some in Wallonia are well preserved, like Mons and Namur. Yeah, a lot of really beautiful cities. Like some of the architecture is extremely ornate in Belgium, like especially the Flemish part, Flanders, which would also include Brussels. Well, it's not technically in Flanders, but the architecture is Flemish. And yeah, absolutely gorgeous, very ornate. Like some of theirs is just really, really ornate and absolutely astonishing. But yeah, I mean, overall, Belgium, in terms of preservation, it's not perfect. Like some parts aren't well preserved, but other parts very much are. But the absolute quality of the architecture puts it in A tier because some of it is just really amazing, and including a lot of the bigger cities. Like, I mean, of the main cities, I would say Brussels and Ghent and Antwerp all have a good deal of well-preserved architecture. It's just some of the cities not as much. Like I think Liège is the name of the city. It's in Wallonia. It's also one of the major cities there. It's not that well preserved, but yeah. Belgium overall A tier. Some very gorgeous architecture there. Austria, I'm also putting in A tier. It has a lot of really beautiful places, like Vienna's gorgeous, Salzburg, Graz, all beautiful cities. A lot of really beautiful architecture in Austria. I think what narrowly makes it miss S tier is just, I think, like it is well preserved mostly, but you do, like in Vienna, you'll see streets where it's like mostly well preserved, but there's some modernist buildings here and there. And the intrusion of these buildings is just a bit more of it than you'd see in Southern Europe on average, like in like Italy, for instance. It's still like, I would say Vienna, like the core part of the city is probably like 75% historic buildings, 25% modernist buildings, something like that. And again, it can vary from street to street, block to block, square to square. Mostly Vienna's pretty well preserved, but there's just some modernist buildings that stick out like a sore thumb, like especially where the Stephansdom Cathedral is. The buildings across from it are these like ugly modernist ones that are really garish. But right next to that is a very well preserved historic square, the main square in Vienna. So again, Vienna, I'd say it's mostly well preserved, but there's just some modernist intrusions, probably as a result of bombing in World War II. Like it wasn't as severely bombed as the cities in Germany, but I think there was a bit of it there, which is why we see this ugly modernist shit popping up a bit in Vienna. Like I'd say Vienna is probably better preserved than like London, but worse than like, say, Rome. And so yeah, a little bit knocked off because of that. Like Austria probably would be S tier if not for that, but yeah, I had to knock off a few points for that. So yeah. Next on the list of A tier, Montenegro. Now I have not been in Montenegro, but judging from what I've seen, yeah, it deserves A tier because it's a very small country, but there's some very beautiful locations, like a lot of these small towns along the Adriatic coast. Now, their capital, Podgorica, is not that great, but it's not a big city. Like, Montenegro is not a big country, so the capital is not a huge city either. But yeah, overall, I would put Montenegro as A tier. Also an A tier, Slovakia. Very well-preserved country. Like, Bratislava is a very well-preserved city. Gorgeous architecture. Bratislava is the only place I've been in Slovakia, but from what I've seen, other cities there are nice too. I guess the only thing that what puts Slovakia in A tier is simply that there's nothing especially unique about the architecture there. Like it's beautiful, but it's not like, it's not like perhaps as jaw-dropping as some other countries. It's a smaller country, so I got to take it into account like per capita. I think A tier is fair for Slovakia. Like, yeah, overall. Slovenia, I'm putting as also A tier. I have not been to Slovenia, But yeah, beautiful mix of styles, Mediterranean architecture along the Adriatic coast, and more kind of Germanic style architecture as you get further inland. Yeah, gorgeous, pretty country, absolutely. So A tier for Slovenia. It's like, again, it's beautiful, but there's nothing that like is like, you know, the most ornate jaw-dropping stuff in all of Europe. So that's kind of why it's A tier as opposed to S tier, just as with Slovakia. But yeah. B tier, I'm putting Switzerland. Now, Switzerland is very well preserved, especially for a Northwestern European country. The only thing that prevents me from putting it higher, and I've debated this, like maybe Switzerland deserves A tier. Again, I haven't been to Switzerland, so this is just going off what I'm seeing on Google Street View. What makes me not put it up higher is like the architecture is very beautiful, but it's not quite as ornate as in some places. Like it's a lot of like kind of fairly simple looking buildings, but it's very pretty. Again, like I could be wrong. Like maybe Switzerland, it's really on the border between A and B tier, but yeah, I'd put it there overall. Next country is Hungary. And by the way, every one of these countries, if I don't say I haven't been there, assume I have been there. So yes, I've been to Hungary, and etc. So yeah, Hungary I put as B tier. Very beautiful architecture, like the Parliament buildings are stunning, and so is the main cathedral in Budapest. I forgot the name, the one with the dome. I'm sorry, I forgot. I think it might be St. Stephen's. Yeah, very gorgeous cathedral interior there too. Yeah, Budapest as a whole is a pretty well-preserved city. I think it's similar to Vienna in terms of the level of preservation. So I'd say it's like 75-80% in the core, still historic, but a few modernist buildings here and there. Kind of similar in smaller towns in Hungary. A lot of them are pretty well-preserved. I have been to a number of them. And overall pretty nice architecture. It's just, I guess... you know, it's there are some modernist buildings here and there, so I guess I knocked it down to B tier for that reason, but still quite nice in that regard. Also in B tier, I'm putting Denmark. Denmark is very well preserved by the standards of Scandinavia, especially like Copenhagen. A lot of beautiful buildings there, and some of the smaller towns in Denmark too. Not quite as ornate as some countries, but there's still a lot of beautiful stuff. Yes, there's actually some ornate stuff, like some of the palaces there. There are some pretty impressive palaces. So yeah, Denmark is a high B tier. And again, one thing with all these countries, like Europe in general is really beautiful. So something in B tier or C tier by European standards is still like A tier or S tier by global standards. It's just that, you know, with Europe, it's all relative. So even these countries in like B and C tier are still pretty spectacular. So yeah. On to C tier now. So in C tier, I have the Netherlands. Now the Netherlands, it's pretty well preserved aside from Rotterdam. Rotterdam was like almost completely destroyed in World War II, but like the rest of the country's cities as a whole, including Amsterdam, but also some of the smaller ones, are pretty well preserved. What makes me put it in C tier is like some of their architecture, it's not my favorite. Like it's still nice, but it's not my favorite. Like often the buildings, like the ornate part is like the top of the buildings, like the gables at the top, but the rest of the building below the top can be a bit relatively simple, like kind of like maroon bricks and windows and not many adornments, which is still nice, but just perhaps not as ornate as in some countries. However, the canals are definitely nice touch. There's a lot of canals in the Netherlands. So it's definitely pretty. It's just, I guess I would say it's just not my favorite personally, but it's still very pretty. Like it's still objectively great architecture. It's just, it's not my favorite. But yeah, it's still a nice place to visit for sure. Also in C tier is Sweden. Sweden is it's kind of a mixed bag. Like Stockholm is pretty well preserved, and the town of Visby on the island of Gotland also very beautiful. But other parts of Sweden, not so much. Like there's some of the other cities and towns are a mixed bag or not that great. Or like I went to Malmo. It was all right in terms of the level of architecture. Haven't been to Gothenburg, but I've seen it on Street View. It's like it's okay, but I put it below Malmo. Yeah, it's just Sweden mixed bag in terms of the level of preservation. Stockholm is absolutely gorgeous. Like I think it's a very beautiful city. Even like by any standard, like people be like, "Oh, Stockholm's beautiful for a Scandinavian city," but I'd say it's beautiful for any city. Like it's a gorgeous city, especially with like the water, how it like flows between the different islands. It's like so you have that juxtaposition of like the really stately buildings with the water in between. So it's yeah, I mean, I think Stockholm's a very beautiful city. Also Visby on the island of Gotland, very underrated small town that's absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Sweden's a bit of a mixed bag, so yeah, C tier. Next in C tier, also mixed bag, is the UK. Now the UK, again, like there was a lot of places that were bombed pretty heavily in World War II. So you really got to know where to go in the UK because some places are very beautiful and well preserved, some are not. And then some cities are a mixed bag. Like London is a massive mixed bag. It really depends which neighborhood you go to. Some are absolutely gorgeous, and then some are just modernist dystopias, even in the center of the city. So it's like you really got to know where exactly to go. I'd say the most well-preserved major city in the UK is probably Edinburgh. Edinburgh is gorgeous. Very unique architectural style too. It's distinct from like other European cities. It has this kind of like Gothic industrial kind of vibe that I think is very unique and eclectic. But yeah, UK, a lot of great palaces in the UK, like stately manors and palaces. Some nice small towns too, like Bath and Cambridge, or not really too small, but like yes, medium-sized small cities, whatever. York, Chester, Oxford. Yeah, I mean UK, it's a mixed bag for sure because some of the other major cities aren't so great because they were bombed a lot in World War II, and you have the ugly modern shit. Like I'd say Birmingham, Manchester, a lot of the medium-sized cities are not so great. So yeah, UK is a pretty big mixed bag. Bosnia, I've not been to Bosnia. I'm putting it in C tier. It has some beautiful places from what I've seen of it, like Mostar and some parts of Sarajevo. And there's that other town, what's it called? I forget what it's called. Trebinje, I think it is, yeah. But there's also parts that are kind of meh. So yeah, overall I'm putting Bosnia in C tier. Georgia, again, haven't been there. I'm putting it in C tier. From what I've seen, Tbilisi is rather pretty and unique architecture. Some nice monasteries and stuff too. But then some of the other cities and towns in Georgia aren't so great. So I guess I put it C tier overall. Romania gets C tier. It has some very beautiful places, like some of these, I think, towns that were built by Germans in Transylvania, like Sighisoara, Brasov. What's the other two? There's like four of them. I remember those two. There's two other. I think Medias, is that it? And there's another one. It's just the name escapes me. I've not been to Romania either, but yeah. Some beautiful towns in that area and castles also. The thing is, though, the rest of the country outside of Transylvania isn't quite as impressive. And from what I've seen of Bucharest, it's like it's okay, but it's not great. It's like people mostly go there because they think it's Budapest and get confused. That's the joke everybody makes. But I mean, it has actually happened before. But yes, I mean, it's a mixed bag, I think, as a country. Some parts are really beautiful, other parts not so much. So yeah, I get C tier for that reason. Estonia, I put in C tier because it's a small country. I've been to Tallinn. Tallinn is absolutely gorgeous. And I think the university town of Tartu, which I've not been to, is also kind of pretty, but other parts of the country, not so much. So it's a relatively small country. But yeah, there are some places, like I know the town of Narva on the border with Russia. It used to be really pretty, but then got destroyed in World War II, and now it's kind of just ugly. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, but Tallinn is really gorgeous. It's very white too. So yeah, definitely, yeah. Estonia, I'd say high C tier, leaning toward B, but I'd knock it down to C because some places are not so well preserved. So yeah. D tier. Now D tier, we get a lot of very tragic cases in D tier of countries that like used to be really beautiful, but just aren't as much today. Germany is in D tier for that reason. A lot of the smaller towns and villages are some of the most gorgeous places you'll ever see. But then you go to the big cities and they're absolutely hideous because they were destroyed in World War II and replaced by a combination of modernist architecture and really, really half-assed attempts at rebuilding the traditional architecture. Like the only things that are really authentic looking in the big cities are sometimes like the monuments, like the monumental buildings, like the landmarks, like the cathedrals and palaces. But the regular buildings are often, they look like shit, to be honest, in the big cities. But again, like some of the smaller cities and towns like Heidelberg, Tübingen, Bamberg, Rothenburg. I've been to these, like the ones I'm listing here. I've not been to Quedlinburg, but I know it's quite pretty too. Schwäbisch Hall. Like, yeah, smaller cities and towns, a lot of them are quite nice. It's just the big ones it's really tragic. Like, they're hideous and, like, they used to be some of the most beautiful places on earth. Like, you know, if I was making this, like, before World War II, Germany would have been in S tier. Like, it had some of the most amazing cities on the planet. And now they're just hideous. And, yeah, it's really sad. It's really blackpilling. So unfortunately, I have to put Germany in D tier. Similar to Germany, similar reasons, Poland. Now, Poland did a bit better job at rebuilding some of the cities that were destroyed, but still not perfect because it's like often in Poland, it's like the main square will look really good, but then you go outside the main square and it looks kind of crappy. Like Wrocław is kind of like that. So yeah, I mean, but Krakow is very well preserved. It wasn't destroyed in World War II. So yeah, very well preserved city. It's quite nice. Very gorgeous cathedral there. Like I think it's St. Mary's Cathedral in Krakow is like the interior is absolutely phenomenal. Warsaw partially rebuilt. Some of the parts that were rebuilt look really nice, but then it's not the whole city that was rebuilt. It's just a small section. So you go outside of there and it starts looking ugly. So yeah, Poland, unfortunately, similar reasons to Germany, I have to put in D tier. Would have probably been S tier before World War II. And again, it's like what would have been Poland or Germany before. Yeah, there's that whole debate. But yeah, unfortunately, Poland has to be D tier now for that reason. Also D tier, Greece. Similar reasons. It wasn't so much, I don't think it was bombing in World War II. I think it's more just like they destroyed a lot of stuff to make way for like added population growth because of people returning from Turkey. I don't know exactly how it happened or why it happened, but unfortunately, a lot of the architecture in the major cities in Greece is just not very well preserved, like in Athens and Thessaloniki and even the mid-sized cities. And really where you get the better architecture in Greece tends to be, like, I haven't been to Greece, by the way, so I'm going off what I've seen on Street View, is like the islands tends to be where there's nicer architecture as opposed to the mainland, from what I've seen. So, yeah, unfortunately, Greece is D tier, which is kind of sad for a country that gets as much tourism as they do. But, yeah. Ireland, I'm also putting as D tier. It's like... Ireland is really beautiful, like nature-wise, but architecture-wise, it's like, it's all right. It's all right. I mean, Dublin, I haven't been to Ireland, so again, I'm going off Google Street View here, what I've seen of it in pictures. Dublin looks like it's a mixed bag. It has some really beautiful landmark buildings, but the city overall is kind of meh, like varying levels of preservation, and what there is like, you know, good but not great sometimes. So, yeah, I think for architecture, Ireland is D tier. But again, it has very beautiful natural scenery, and some of the architecture is really gorgeous there. It's just overall, I think, yeah, D tier. Turkey, no, again, a lot of like not really a European country, but close enough and kind of intertwined with Europe historically. So I'll put it on this list. Turkey gets D tier because okay, there's a lot of places like Istanbul has some absolutely phenomenal architecture, some of the most gorgeous buildings I've ever seen. Like I have been to Istanbul recently, so like mosques, churches, palaces, tombs. Like there's a lot of cool stuff in Istanbul. It's just the thing is, like in Istanbul, there's also some ugly modernist buildings interspersed throughout. Depends on the neighborhood. Like some neighborhoods in Istanbul are better preserved than others. But moreover, like, okay, all of Turkey, like Istanbul in and of itself would be much higher, but all of Turkey is not Istanbul. And when you look at the rest of the country, a lot of it's kind of lacking in the architectural department, like especially like you get to like the Kurdish areas and the inland. And I mean, from what I've seen of it in pictures, Antalya is kind of pretty, nothing spectacular, but kind of nice. Fairly well preserved, but nothing spectacular. Izmir is, from what I've seen, looks kind of disappointing because I know it was a beautiful city at one point, but I guess the Great Fire really devastated it quite a bit. Ankara, modernist, blah. Yeah, honestly, Turkey overall gets D tier because again, I'm talking about the average of the country. Again, like the best architecture in Istanbul is some of the best in the world, but you have to take into account the country as a whole. So that's why Turkey still gets D tier. Also similar, Russia. Now, Russia, again, some of the most phenomenal architecture in the world in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and some of the monasteries in what they call the Golden Ring near Moscow. Absolutely. Russia has some very unique, world-class, astounding architecture in terms of the cathedrals, the Kremlins, the palaces, all that stuff. Absolutely phenomenal. So why does Russia get D tier? Because again, as I've said, I am talking about the average of the country overall. And it's like when you go into Siberia and other parts of the country, like even like southern parts of European Russia by Stalingrad or Volgograd or whatever it's called now, like that whole region, like you get a lot of places where it's just nothing, like there's not really hardly any historic architecture left. And in some places, there probably never was that much in the first place, like in certain parts of Siberia. So yeah, Russia gets D tier because, again, I'm talking about the average here. And again, like some of these countries in D tier, the best that they have to offer is astounding. Like Germany, Greece, Poland, Russia, Turkey all have like some of the best architecture in the world in the best spots. It's just that I'm viewing these countries in terms of the average. So yeah, another one in D tier is Norway. Again, it has some pretty places like Bergen, and I haven't been to Norway. I haven't been to Russia either, by the way. But yeah. But like overall, like Oslo, from what I've seen, isn't that great. Like not that pretty. A lot of cities in Norway are kind of like that, like modernist cities and towns. So I mean, there's a few nice towns in Norway, but I think overall the level of architectural preservation out there isn't that great. Some beautiful stave churches, the ones that Varg didn't burn down. So, but overall, yeah, Norway I'm putting in D tier. It's just, again, based on the average. Like it has some very beautiful spots, but like the average isn't that great. Also in D tier, Ukraine. Again, I don't know what's even left of Ukraine now, so it's hard to say, but I haven't been to Ukraine, but yes, from what I've seen, like there's some very beautiful architecture in Lviv in particular, which is in the western part, used to be part of Poland. So it's really more, I think, Polish than Ukrainian in terms of who built it. And also Kiev as a whole, not a gorgeous city, but has some very beautiful cathedrals. So yeah, Ukraine and Odessa has some nice stuff, but nothing spectacular. Yeah, so Ukraine overall, D tier. There's some nice spots for sure, but the average, like there's a lot of places that even before the current war, like there's a lot that was destroyed in World War II also. So yeah, I mean, Yeah, it wouldn't be super high overall, but it has some gorgeous places for sure. Latvia I haven't been there. From what I've seen, like Riga has some beautiful buildings, but it's not totally well preserved and like it's a mixed bag. And then other cities in Latvia, cities and towns are not so great. So yeah, Lithuania basically similar to Latvia with like I think Vilnius is better preserved than Riga, but maybe a bit like what there is in Riga might be a bit more spectacular. So the other cities in Lithuania, cities and towns, not so much. I think there's one other, Kaunas, that's all right, but a lot of it, like for instance, the city Klaipeda, which is used to be called Memel, I think, used to be German, totally destroyed in World War II, unfortunately. Used to be a beautiful city, but kind of like Kaliningrad, which is close by. So yeah, Lithuania and Latvia, I think overall get D tier. A bit, which is below Estonia, which gets C tier because I think Tallinn, very beautiful and well preserved city. So having Tallinn in Estonia knocks it up a notch. But yeah. So E tier, a lot of people don't do E tier, but I'm doing E tier because there's a lot of gradients here. I put Albania in E tier. It has some beautiful small towns and stuff. I've never been to Albania, so I'm going off what I've seen on imagery. Not been to Latvia, Lithuania either. Yeah, but yeah, Albania has some beautiful spots in terms of small towns, but like from what I've seen, the capital city Tirana is not that great, not that well preserved. And even the beautiful places Albania has, like there's some places that are kind of pretty, but none of the architecture is like jaw-dropping or terribly unique. And it's relatively simple. You know, there's nothing like terribly ornate there in Albania. So yeah, I'm putting it E tier. Serbia, not terribly well preserved. Like I haven't been there, but from what I'm seeing on Street View, like Belgrade, mixed bag, like some beautiful old buildings, but some modernist ones, not terribly well preserved. Like probably about 50-50, maybe like 60-40 more modernist stuff, I would say, or 70-30. And what they do have, it's some of it's nice, but there's nothing terribly like unique about their architecture. Like a lot of it's kind of looks like has that like kind of, you could say, generic Central European kind of vibe. So yeah, I'm putting Serbia E tier. Finland, again, also have not been to Finland. I've actually heard that it's the least architecturally well-preserved country in Europe. Like the lowest percentage of its architecture is pre-World War II. There's a lot of modernist stuff there, but Helsinki does have some beautiful spots. Like the main square in Helsinki is quite pretty with the cathedral there. So I'm gonna put it in E tier. It narrowly avoids F tier, but the main square in Helsinki in and of itself gets it out of F tier. But yeah, Finland is not a very well preserved country in terms of the architecture. A lot of modernist stuff, not a ton of historic architecture there. Also E tier is Bulgaria. Again, I haven't been there. And again, some people will criticize me, be like, oh, all your low-ranking countries are ones you haven't been to. But it's like, that's the reason why I haven't been to them, is because I choose countries, I research the countries first. And if a country doesn't look that great, I probably won't go there. So, yeah, Bulgaria, again, like Plovdiv has some very unique architecture, quite interesting and different from anywhere else. But it's not a huge city. It's just kind of a medium-sized city. And most of the country looks kind of not that great in terms of the level of architectural preservation. So, yeah, Bulgaria, I'm putting E tier. F tier, Macedonia, or as it's now called, North Macedonia. Just from what I haven't been there. Okay, I haven't been to any of the ones in F tier, but from what I've seen, it just nothing stands out there. It just doesn't look terribly well preserved, and what there is doesn't look terribly ornate or unique. Again, like I support preserving all traditional architecture, but there's nothing, spectacular from what I've seen, comparatively speaking, in Macedonia. Cyprus, again, a country that gets a lot of tourists, but doesn't seem, from what I've seen, to have much well-preserved architecture. So, yeah, Armenia. From what I've seen, Armenia doesn't have much well-preserved architecture at all, aside from a few monasteries. The cities there seem to be overwhelmingly modernist. So, yeah, Azerbaijan. Why is this even on the fucking list? F tier. I mean, there's some historic stuff in Baku, but it's nothing spectacular. So yeah, F tier. Iceland, does Iceland have any historic buildings at all? F tier for sure. Moldova, from what I've seen of it, it's just very much Stalinist, Soviet looking, not much historic architecture. Very poor country and just poor in architecture too, sadly. So F tier. Belarus, again, similar to Moldova, just very communist, not that much well-preserved historic architecture there. So yeah, that's the list as a whole. You're free to agree or disagree. Tell me what you think in the comments. And yeah, this video is pretty long. So that's it for now.